Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start because we have some folks who are joining us or have joined us. Because we're using the webinar format, we can not see each other, but that will give Rebecca the floor. Thank you for coming on to our November Tot Talk. I know this is a busy week after the holiday. I hope everybody had a lovely Thanksgiving holiday. My name is Shannon Moody. I am Georgetown Hill's Director of Education, and I've been organizing and facilitating our monthly Tot Talks. So far, we've had a couple of different sessions on things like picky eating and nutrition, potty training, speech and language development. So I'm really happy to have Rebecca Parlakian here this evening from 0 to 3. 0 to 3, for those of you who may not be familiar, is a national organization that creates programs and resources and policies for those who are working with children ages 0 to 3, infants, toddlers, and early preschoolers. So Rebecca's going to share some information about screen time with littles, and I will ask that if you do have questions as Rebecca's going through her material in the beginning, that you just throw them in the chat box, and then I can field the questions when Rebecca wraps up and we can do some Q&A. So go ahead and put questions in the chat, and Rebecca, go ahead.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Senior Director of Programs at 0 to 3, and my background is that I'm a child development and parenting specialist, and I have a master's degree in early childhood special education. One of the areas that I've worked in a lot over the last few years is really trying to take the research on screens and young children and make some sense of it, because it's a complicated field. There's a lot of research, and the advice is often conflicting and often kind of judgmental, especially to parents. And I really want us as a community, a research community, as a practice community, just really to move away from that, because the reality is screens are everywhere. I mean, the other day I was in like a Panera downtown, and I ordered my sandwich on a screen, and then they called my number, right? So the question is not like, will we expose our young children to screens? It's really how and in what ways do we choose to expose our young children to screens? And in fact, that's really one of the first and most important things that we're going to talk about today, which is that a lot of the research is about screen time, how much time children spend in front of screens. But what the research shows is that when they actually design studies that look at what children are watching, the content matters a lot. So what I'm hoping to do today is really give you the information you need to just have some screen sense when you're making these decisions, that they're grounded in what we know about early development and what we know about screens. So we can move on. So I have to, of course, talk about the American Academy of Pediatrics screen recommendations, as much as I don't want to, because about 99.9% of parents feel like these are completely unrealistic, or if not completely unrealistic, at least really hard to stick to. And I was just presenting on screens in young children last Monday at a conference in DC, and coincidentally, there was a doctor there on the panel with me who is on the committee to revise these recommendations. So hang in there, new recommendations are coming, but to change AAP policy, it takes years. So it's going to be a while, but it's coming. So currently the recommendations are for children under the age of 18 months, avoid all use of screen media other than video chat. Just as a side note, there's been no downsides found with video chat, and in fact, a lot of upsides. And if you're interested in hearing a little bit about that research, I'm happy to answer any questions. For kids 18 to 24 months and parents who want to introduce screen content, the focus is really on choosing high quality educational content and to watch it and engage with it with their children. And then for children ages 2 to 5 years, limiting screen use to an hour a day, again, educational content, and parents co-viewing and co-engaging. And again, no limit on video chat as much as they want. There's a wonderful research showing that even babies can come to recognize and build connections with people that they meet and interact with on video chat. So it's really a great way of connecting with distant family. So probably the best way of thinking about screens is something called the 3 C's that was developed by Lisa Guernsey at the New America Foundation. And the 3 C's are basically the child, the content, and the context. So if you can remember these 3, we're going to talk about it throughout, but this can really be sort of your guiding principles in deciding what screen experiences to offer your child. So the child matters. And what that means is that, we really have to think about what is age appropriate for our particular child and choose content that's aligned to that age range. We also have to think about our individual child. So for example, I have a friend whose child was very fearful and shows that I don't know if any of you have ever seen Arthur, the Aardvark on PBS, but there are some episodes of Arthur where there's, some dramatic situations that would be fine for her peers, but that she would get really upset by. So really, again, thinking about what's right for our individual child's age and temperament. And then we also need to remember, how our little ones' brains are developing in the early years. Now, I know my husband is, thank God, very handy. And so he'll see something that's broken around the house and he'll go on YouTube, watch a video about how to fix it, and then immediately be able to kind of transfer that knowledge to actually fixing the thing, like most recently our refrigerator right before Thanksgiving. Children are not good at this, especially young children, and we call it the transfer deficit. What that means is that knowledge that they learn on a screen, they have a lot of difficulty transferring it to the 3D world that we all live in. So they might, for example, learn their colors in a song that they sing along with Elmo, but in the quote unquote real world, if you point to a square of yellow and say, what color is that? They may not be able to answer. And that's because there's this transfer deficit. They know it in one place on the screen, but they have a hard time moving that knowledge to the real world. And the way we can reduce the transfer deficit is by engaging with them and helping them transfer that learning by saying, okay, we learned our colors, in the Elmo song, let's play a color matching game. So really, sort of consciously helping them have experience in transferring that learning. Now, we all get better at this as we mature. This research was really done on 2 to 4-year-olds. We know that school-age children even are becoming quite adept at transfer of learning. So this is kind of a very early, quirky piece of exposing young children to screens. They still learn most effectively and most easily through real life 3D interactions with the world, playing with toys and talking with people. And the content really matters. This is the second C. And so what we know from the research is that educational content, which is child-directed content from media sources that engage child development experts, that engage curriculum developers. I know from work we've done with PBS in the past, when they work on a show like Cyber Chase, which is for older kids and focuses on math, they actually engage a curriculum specialist to decide what lessons or what learning objectives are going to be covered in each episode. So educational content, no problem. We're going to see components like slower pacing. We're going to see components like, these shows are going to feature children's everyday worlds. They're going to feature children's everyday problems. So for example, I often show a clip of Caillou and he's afraid to jump in the pool. So issues like this, we're going to see coming up in this educational content. Slower pace, The characters are going to ask the children questions and wait for their response. They're going to solicit interaction. And we're also going to see real life issues and, settings that children can recognize. The next type of content is educational children's content. And this kind of content is not great for young children. I often, when I do a full length presentation on this topic, I show a clip of Caillou and then a clip of SpongeBob. And what you'll see in entertainment content is the pace is so fast that for a young child who's trying to process the visual and auditory inputs, it's really hard to make sense of it. First of all, like they're under the ocean. They live in a pineapple. And also, of course, like with the Transformers, not only is the pacing fast, the plot difficult to understand, but it's also frightening. And then finally, the last type of content is adult-directed television. So we might think, Jeopardy or a baseball game, has no impact on children. They don't understand it, but it doesn't scare them either. What we know from research, though, is that if children are playing and there's sort of constant sensory interruptions, like, all of a sudden they're building a block tower and they hear do, 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 do. It really interrupts the flow of their play and can interrupt their learning. So if possible, try to avoid exposing children to adult content, period. And of course, avoid exposing them to content like the news or truly adult programming like a show like CSI. There was a advice column letter recently that said, I love watching horror movies and I sit with my 15-year-old watching a 15-month-old watching horror movies. Is that okay? Because she has no idea what's going on. And it's really not okay because they do take in the sounds, the tension of the parent's body. So even though we don't think that they're frightened, we know that children can experience fright starting at 5 to 6 months of age. So just avoid if at all possible. So just, the quick summary to take away is that high quality children's educational programming does not correlate with any negative impacts to the child. That's what the research said. Low quality children's entertainment programming or adult-oriented programming does correlate with negative impacts to the child. So it really is, content is such a critical variable. And we know that the context matters. So what's happening around the child, you matter. So the more that parents can engage with their child around the content, ask questions about how a character is feeling, ask what's going on, sing along with the songs, suggest a game to help transition the learning from the screen to real life. Those are great ways that you can engage with screens with your child. We know that in about 40% of American homes, the television is on in the background all the time. And we know also that most background TV is typically not child-directed television. It's mostly probably adult-oriented television. And the research has shown that background TV can interfere in children's play and interfere in their learning. Having background TV on correlates with less parent-child interaction, probably because it's distracting to both people. So just be thinking about that as you're making your screen time decisions. So how do we choose media experiences for young children? We came up with a little thing, E-AIMS. I forget what that is. It's 5:30, so it's a little bit beyond my brain time. But the E stands for engaged. Is my child engaged? So is there a story or a learning goal that's part of the screen experience? Is there lots of extra interactivity, like things exploding or balloons popping or music that plays for no reason? That's really more of a distraction than a learning tool for children. So what you can do is look for content that, again, was developed by an educational team, and to avoid programs with lots of extra sensory distractions that take children away from the central learning goal. The ACE The AI stands for actively involved. So, what we're looking for here is, does your child look like they're really thinking about what's happening on the screen? Like, are they participating in the content? Like, if a character asks a question and your child responds because they're really interested in what's happening. Sometimes we'll see a child playing a video game. Like the other day, I was doing an observation and a child had a bubble popping game on a phone, and they were just kind of like automatically, like without really thinking, just popping the bubbles on the screen. So we want to kind of avoid those autopilot games because there's no learning going on, and it's just it's engagement with no purpose, really. We want to see children that are challenged but not frustrated by what they're watching or playing. So you're going to, again, choose engaging content that promotes interaction with the child. And also review the media yourself. Like if you're choosing a game or an app for your child, play it yourself and see what it's like. See what kind of challenge level it is, and then sit next to your child the first few times they play so that you can kind of be their partner. We want to, again, support that co-engagement with the parent, which we know from research is much harder with single person devices like phones or tablets. And then, is the content meaningful? So does it reflect children's everyday life and things they're familiar with? Does it build on their current knowledge? Or does it include a lot of imaginary or complex elements? Like think about SpongeBob, how confusing that must be to a 3-year-old. And finally, is there social interaction? Does the program encourage children to respond? Does the program encourage them to interact with you? So you want to include or choose media that's really language rich, that's using, storybook-like language, so that we know that children can learn vocabulary from screens. Again, if there are adults there to support and mediate that. And a lot of shows now are really being developed well to actually teach children the meaning of the word within the context of the show. We can also be really creative during video chat with having each partner, for example, do high fives or do, itsy bitsy spider together, roll cars back and forth, each draw a picture and show each other the picture. So think about ways to make video chat really interactive. I think a lot of times when we get grandparents on the other line, we're just happy they got on the Zoom successfully. But really, we can give grandparents some great ideas about how to make those moments fun, because I think sometimes our toddlers get bored and they just get up and run away, but we can create play routines even on video chat. And 0 to 3 has a handout about that. I've included the link at the end of the slide deck. So finally, last thing I'll talk about really quickly is developing a family media plan. And when I talk about family media plans, I always start with us, because I certainly know that I am tempted to be on my phone a lot. And I don't know if you can read the caption here, but it's a train platform. And the caption said, "A man was caught watching the real world." And you can see that there's one guy in the red circle who's not on a phone. So that's kind of a reminder to all of us that we need to be cognizant of our own screen use. The research is really showing that parent screen use is constituting significant missed opportunities for connection with young children. And one study actually observed parents in a fast food restaurant. About 30% of parents were on screens during the entire meal with their child. And what do we know about children when they're not getting the attention they want? They keep escalating their behavior until someone pays attention to them. And what the research found is that as children escalated their behavior, parents responded very angrily. So this can really set up a kind of a sad dynamic where a child is really hungry for attention and connection, but the parent is then responding angrily. And then a really interesting study done by friends and colleagues, Brandon McDaniel and Jenny Radesky, surveyed parents and just asked, about how many times a day do you feel like technology interrupts your interactions with your child? And it was about half of parents said technology interruptions constituted 3 or more interruptions a day. And that's a lot. So what does it feel like for the child? Highlights Magazine did a survey of children, 1,000 American children, and asked them about their parents' mobile screen use. It was one of many questions. And children used words like sad, mad, angry, and lonely. And they found their parents' screen use very disconnecting. And these are just some of the quotes from children. Like, I feel like I'm just boring. I'm boring because my dad will take any text, any call, anytime. I'm your daughter. You had me because you wanted me. Only it doesn't feel like that right now. Right now, it feels like all you care about is your phone. So again, I'm not sharing this to blame or to, make people feel bad, but it's really to ground ourselves in why it's a family media plan and not just a children's media plan. So things to think about in terms of the media plan. First of all, engage your co-partner, because it really helps everyone if rules and expectations are consistent across houses or even within the same house. And the research does show that family media plans can be effective. So the first thing that you want to think about is, what content will we allow our child to watch at the current age that they're at? What is okay to watch? And then you kind of create a list of acceptable programming or acceptable games. And then duration is, how much time do we want to allow our children to be engaged with screens per day? And what times of day is it okay with us? And that's something that has to work for you and your family. Maybe it makes sense for them to be on a screen during your commute home because the traffic is terrible, you're not in the mood to talk or sing or play games. I get it. We were just talking about the drive back from DC. It's not fun. So whatever you work out for your family works for your family. It's going to look different in every house. Timing is, what times of day are we going to allow our children to engage with screens? And the one flag I would put here is that the data is unanimous that screens before bed are a really, really bad idea. Children who engage with screens before bed sleep less, wake more often, and are more tired the next day. So really, if possible, use the hour before bedtime to really wind down, to really create a routine that's around connection, stories, songs, darkened room, to really give children's bodies the cue that it's time for bed. And this can be even more important for children who have more intense temperaments or who have higher activity levels. Finally, the longest standing research about screens is that it is deeply correlated to obesity and weight gain. And that is for the simple reason that children just don't understand the purpose of ads. They don't understand that ads are designed to trick you into doing something, and that the ads children are exposed to on children's entertainment programming, I think the last data point I saw was like 80% of them are for unhealthy foods. I think around this time of year, 80% of them are for toys that you don't want to buy, but typically they're for foods that are not great for kids. And then what happens is that exposure to those ads shapes children's requests. So your kid is sitting in the cart being like, mommy, I want Fruit Loops, or daddy, I want Oreos. And, at some point in the supermarket, if you're like me, you just become a broken human being and you're like, fine, I'll buy the Fruit Loops this week. And then we also know children eat more and more mindlessly when they're watching TV. They're not registering what we call satiety or fullness when you're watching television. I think if any of you have ever sat with a bag of potato chips in front of a great movie, you know what you mean. You just kind of eat mindlessly. So those are the reasons why it's best to not eat in front of a screen, to turn screens off during family mealtime, and to try and choose programming that is not exposing your child to commercial advertisements. Okay, so I think I'm just going to leave these slides. I'm going to give the slide deck. I think I just talked through all of this anyway, but I'm going to give the slide deck to Shannon to share with you all. This is the link to 0 to 3's parent resources on screens that I developed a few years ago with colleagues at the Lego Foundation and an amazing, brilliant researcher at Georgetown University who's been researching children in screens for about 20 years now and has been a leader in the field. So I hope they're useful to you. We tried to make them really parent friendly. And these are just some additional screen resources. Common Sense Media, if you're not familiar with it, reviews all children's media, apps, games, and programs and movies so that you know exactly what the content is, exactly what age it's appropriate for, and you get an unbiased review. So it's really a gem to check out. So I think that's it for me blabbering on. And now I'm kind of happy to share or answer questions that may come in.
Okay. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. I don't see any at the moment. I have one though. Well, one, I have my 9-year-old trained to check common sense himself before he asks me.
Oh, that's so cool.
If he can watch something because he knows I'm going to look at it anyway.
Yeah.
Have you ever come across any research about sensory sensitivity and screen use? So I'm thinking about, I feel like in some of my travels, I've come across conversations where kids who are prone to sensory overstimulation, oftentimes screens will have a calming effect on sort of that overstimulated brain, obviously depending on the content. I'm wondering if you've heard any about this, just because we're always thinking about ways to support kids who have various sensory sensitivities. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think that, for example, I'm thinking about, children with autism. So they may, find a particular show really comforting for their particular routine, or they may find it regulating. And a lot of shows that have this, expected story arc, so like the beginning, middle, and end of a story may be very comforting for a child, or a particular character might be very regulating for a child. I'm not sure if I've seen any research on the sensory piece, but I can actually look and ask Dr. Barr at Georgetown if she knows of anything. I know that there was a very large scale study, like 4,000 children that they followed in China. They followed this sample of 4,000 children for 4 years. And they found that children who were exposed to screens early, like in year 1, and who had the most exposure to screens, so had the most screen time, at age 4, had lower language scores and also had more social difficulties. So, again, this particular study didn't do what is my pet peeve, which is they didn't look at content. They only measured time. So we do know that if you're spending a lot of time in front of screens, maybe it's not all high quality. So again, centering ourselves on the content quality is always just good, regardless of what, children are asking for, because we know that there's no documented drawbacks or negative effects of that.
Do you imagine that the AAP's revisions are going to decrease the emphasis on actual time spent? And
Yeah, I mean, what the physician who I was on the panel with, I was babies and toddlers, then there was someone who was middle childhood, and she was an adolescent doctor. And, I think the guidelines are going to be a bit more balanced and really do focus on content, and also, bring home the fact that, for a lot of our teens, at least, or even our middle schoolers, screens are a double-edged sword, right? I mean, it's primarily the way that they're connecting with friends now. It can also be a place that they are having negative social interactions, but it really is an important context for social interaction once we get to a certain age. So we're expecting that the recommendations will both acknowledge the importance of content, acknowledge the reality that screens are everywhere, and that no screens doesn't feel realistic to most families, and I think address the teen usage in a more nuanced way.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions from an attendee is about sort of the parent survival tactics in using screen as a way to be able to get yourself ready or get through the evening. How do we dial it back, and what can we do instead?
Yeah, so I mean, the challenge is real, right? I mean, so I think first of all, reducing screen use is going to be painful if that is your goal. So, because kids don't like changes in their routines, and they also don't like a preferred option not being available to them. So, as with anything, expect there to be some pushback. But I often find that, first of all, boredom is not entirely a bad thing. And we talked about that in the panel last week, that, boredom serves a purpose of motivating children to find something to do. So what we can, if we're trying to get ready, like put our makeup on or get dinner ready or fold laundry, if we're doing a task like laundry or putting dishes away out of the dishwasher, we can actually engage children from 2 years and up in that task, because the thing they love most of all, they love doing real things and they love being with us. So they can be part of that routine. If it's a routine they can't be part of, like, God help me, do not want a toddler helping me with my makeup. So, maybe we do something where we're like, okay, mom has to put her makeup on. You have 2 choices. You can come color on the floor with me, or I have a roll of masking tape. And if you want, you can rip off pieces of masking tape and put them on this piece of paper. So we can kind of give them 2 open-ended options that are both interesting. Or we can even do something like, take out, 6 pairs of socks from our drawer, throw them on the floor of the bathroom and say, why don't you sit here and put these back together as matches for mommy while I get myself together. So you're going to give them some options. But we also, I think, I even feel like this when I'm in airports, like I travel a lot to give talks. It's like we never have to be bored anymore in the world, never. So, I think we need to remember, like, it's okay if our kids just sort of wander the house like pale Victorian ghosts, like whining that there's nothing to do, because they're going to survive, right? And they're going to ultimately find something to do. So I also just want to validate that it's okay if they're bored for a little bit. They'll be okay. And kind of along those lines, a lot of parents ask about, like, my child is having a tantrum, like we've gotten in a habit of giving them the phone because it helps them get out of it a lot quicker. And, I would just say, like, if that happened to me somewhere in the public, right, like where I would not want a loud dramatic tantrum, I would probably just give them the phone. But if it happened at home, it's really important that they don't get a quick fix, because one of the most important social emotional milestones of the first 3 years is developing some self-regulation strategies. And, like, there's a lot of moments in our lives at work or in school with friends where we have to know how to regulate ourselves in the moment. We have to be able to experience like a peak of a big emotion and not be swept away by it, and be able to have strategies to manage ourselves back to a place of calm. That's what the early years are for. And when we help our children skip that whole step by giving them a phone to watch, Bluey or whatever, they kind of miss out on a great learning opportunity. It's, of course, a terrible learning opportunity for us, because we have to sit there with them while they struggle and cry and are frustrated and are figuring it all out. But it's a really critical moment and a critical opportunity to let them wrestle with those big feelings, to learn how to manage them. But that's another webinar on self-regulation.
Absolutely. I have heard in the past that in terms of this sort of survival mechanism using screens, sometimes if you're balancing the use of the screen with the time that you need to do something else that's positive
Yeah,
for a child, like make them a healthy dinner, or, then it
totally.
kind of negates the sort of guilt you should feel
Yeah.
over the screen because you're balancing with something else that's beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I'm not saying you can never use screens as a survival technique, because girl, I have used screens as a survival technique. I'm not going to lie. But we also want to give children like a balanced diet of activities, right? And that's something I forgot to mention earlier, but I think intuitively we know kids need a lot of different kinds of activities across the day. So if you're looking for ways to reduce screen time, think about offering two acceptable activities, letting them wander and stay on board, or occasionally maybe part of your family media plan is like, in the morning, I need coffee and I need a chance to just get myself together. So that's when they're going to have screen time. So that's something that, you can really think about. When does my family, and you're a part of your family, like your needs are important. When do I and the family, when do we need support across the day? When does it make sense to use screens? When does it serve a purpose? And make your plan around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any other questions in our chat right now,
Right.
so I think we'll let you get back to the rest of your evening.
Wonderful.
Thank you everybody for being on with us tonight. We will share information about our next talk, which will probably be in January. We might take a little break for December. But thanks so much, Rebecca, for joining us and for being such a supporter of Georgetown Hill. We really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. And I will hopefully talk to you all soon.
All right, thank you again. Good night.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.